This episode will be completely taken out of context. Welcome to the Fact Check This podcast.
All right, Fact Check This live. And tonight I am rejoined by Jay Forte, Patriot Way Media, and Mr. Magoo. And we are going to talk about, so I guess I should preface this. About 6 months ago, we talked about part one of Paul Fahrenheit's Predicting the Realignment, where Paul talked about the future of the Democratic Party and how all of the young white men were going to become Democrats because of Glenn What's-His-Face from Maverick and Twisters, or something to that effect. And we had varying levels of disagreement about how that would work out and whether or not that was actually true. And of course, we had all of this like before we actually got the election in November. So we had talked about discussing part two of Paul Fahrenheit's Predicting the Realignment, which talks about what happens next for the Republican Party. And effectively, it's Paul's prediction of the complete collapse and death of the Republican Party, because Republicans are nothing but white nationalist old men. And then the election happened. And now we can kind of look at this in hindsight a bit and also discuss some of what he brought up with this and talk about some of the ideas of the white nationalist stuff that he brought up and why that's both wrong and also not necessarily a bad thing in some ways. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we'll touch on with all of this. But before we do that, everybody introduce yourselves one more time.
Jay Forte. I'm just some asshole on the internet. Follow me or don't.
Yeah, ditto. My name's Jim, but Magoo is just what most people know me by on the internet. I'm a retard. I don't tweet, but I am on Twitter. And
Lurker.
After this episode, you may or may not be interested to find out who the fuck I am. We'll see.
Greetings. I go by Patriot Way Media. I have a retired Twitter account that was once perma-banned, but now unbanned, but I'm locked and no longer tweet. So, yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me, Justin. I always forget my manners when I'm around the ilk of Mr. Campbell. I don't know why.
Well, that's because most of the time when we're talking, we're drinking, and manners go out the window pretty quickly whenever you and I get to drinking.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And usually Johnny's yelling at Sean, too.
Or my wife is yelling at me.
Or yelling, fighting with everybody, even when we agree with her.
It's a whole scene. It's
a whole thing, yeah. If you're not familiar with the Peddling Fiction Friday night happy hours and the occasional morning after night before episodes, a lot of times they involve my wife getting drunk and being mean to everybody involved. So if you would like to get in on the action, just come join in the chat. I will point out comments and she will harass you as well. You too can be harassed by my drunken wife. At least once, if not twice a month, for the low price of just a subscription. That's it. So.
And Forte and I never antagonize her, ever.
Anyway, that's enough of our Friday night shenanigans. This is Monday night, and we're talking about serious shit tonight. So, did I recap the part one with the Democrat, the future of the Democrats, relatively succinctly, I guess? I tried to keep it short and sweet because there was a lot of content in both of these articles, but I felt like that was kind of the gist of what Paul was predicting for the future of the Democrat parties. In particular, he thinks that that Southern Democrats who have since become Southern Republicans are going to, for some reason, go back to being Southern Democrats.
The Dixiecrat revival.
Yeah. That none of this is long lasting. It's temporary because of existential circumstances based on the current time that we're in. And it was so clearly obvious that Kamala was so vapid that the off ramp to Trump isn't as radical as you're being told it is. That's why the Democrats will surge back, because retardism is forever. Basically, if you were to crystallize it succinctly.
Somebody get a timestamp on that, because that is that will be the clip of the show. Retardism is forever.
You are
I
a
think-
warrior. You're a warrior poet.
I think Paul has another thesis racially, which is, and he doesn't really express it explicitly in part one, but basically he's alluding to the fact that the South is just forever integrated, that blacks and Africans are here, and therefore Southerners will be wedded to them one way or another. And he hints to those things, but he doesn't say it explicitly. And the reason why I can kind of pick up on that is because he pushes forth this thesis again in part two, where he's basically pointing to California as the destination place of whites and European culture. So I think he's just chalking it up to the South as just going to be mired into this kind of multi-ethnic stew, if you will.
Yeah, I can see that, and you do see that more in part two, because he does, in the second part, he does talk about the darkening of the South more, and not just from a black side of it, but also from the Hispanic side of it, and he gets more into the Hispanic side of it. So part of it, he talks about, like, Hispanics have come to the U.S., specifically Mexicans, with the kind of the allure and the promise of they get to be like the new white folks, but that's like a short-term thing. But I feel like that still kind of misses the mark. Like, Hispanic peoples have not come here to be the new white people and to vote for Republicans. They have largely been here up until this most recent election as a racial voting bloc for the Democrats. So I feel like there's something that gets missed there. And a lot of this came out immediately after the Kamala Harris Donald Trump debate, and it didn't take into account what ended up happening at the polls in November, where it wasn't just the typical white male voting bloc that carried Donald Trump. He gained in literally every demographic except for white women over the age of 60. White women over the age of 60 leaned a little bit more Democrat. Literally every other voting demographic in the country went more Republican. Even black females, like the one block that you would think there's no way Trump touches, even by the thinnest of margin, every single one of the black female age groups leaned more Republican this time around. So
Even
there was
the
a lot
college
that
educated ones.
even them. So there was a lot that ended up happening come November that may not have been as clear in September when that debate happened. And also on top of that, when you look at the way, like, you would think that would be possibly a learning and a growing moment for the Democrats, where they take a step back and they look at like what happened in the election and they're like, oh, we might have kind of fucked that up. Maybe we should like reconsider. Instead, they have doubled down on everything that they were doing up to that point to get them the result that they got in the election. So like, I have trouble seeing either of Fahrenheit's predictions coming true, at least in the next 4 years, because number one, the Democrats don't seem to have learned anything. And number two, the voting blocks that moved more Republican were not just the typical what you expect. It was across the board. And if Trump even has like the slightest modicum of success over the next 2 to 4 years, then it's hard to see Fahrenheit's predictions becoming a reality, at least anytime in the really near future. And then that's not even like taking into account JD Vance and what Vance has brought to the Republican side of things as well. He has something of a, I mean, the memes are hilarious, but also like he's leaned into it and shared some of them and been funny, and like there's a lot of positive to build on that. Also,
I like to call him 48.
If 48 is smart, he should release and he should sell his own JD Vance Garbage Pail Kids card set right now. People my age, up to 10 years older than me, we will mark out for that kind of shit.
Yeah. Well, and then also you've got the Democrat darling Gavin Newsom moving not just on the transgender athletes thing, but he's also since November made some public statements and moved slightly into a more moderate position on things. So instead of seeing like, the right moving back to the Democrat side of things, you're seeing the Democrats, at least the ones who have any level of like, functional brain power, moving more to the right, or at the very least to the middle on things.
I think the big question is, and I'll have to just trust those figures that you put out as far as voting block trends, because we are on the Fact Check This podcast, and I knew that there were gains in like most brackets, but not to that degree in those specific demographics. But again, the pessimist in me, which is the easiest natural state to be in, is to never think anything is going to, the indicators on the wall are not actually projecting you to anything good. It's always some level of less bad, maybe, the perpetual black pill that is like the natural state of the common man. But I say all that to say a 2-year voting trend does not a culture make. So there's still time that Fahrenheit could be right. We're so early into this administration. We're not even 2 months. And you've seen pronouns nuked out of people's bios. You've seen Newsom say it was a mistake to back the trans athlete sentiment that the Dems up until yesterday held. I don't know if any of that is like a permanent, discussion shifter, if they've actually changed their position, or if they're just molding into what they feel the electorate will support so that they can regain their grip on public power. I think a lot of that is left to be seen, but I mean, I like the direction we're going compared to what we were facing 6 months ago.
And that is one of the things that the Democrats have been good about doing over the last 20 years. I don't know that any Democrat politician actually believes in any of the woke progressive bullshit that they've supported over the last 10 to 20 years, but they have sold that they did well enough to get the right people to back them so that they could move the needle and stay in power. I don't believe that any Democrat politician actually believes a single fucking thing that ever comes out of their mouth, but they know how to play the game, and they know how to say the right thing to get the loudest blocks to make the most noise so that it guilt trips large population or large percentages of the population into supporting the shit that they're talking about. On the flip side of that, Trump also knows how to play a crowd. And so you've seen some of that working in his favor over the last year or so.
Yeah, plus like a lot of the what they call flooding the zone, like I feel like it's kept the Democrats on their heels, because they don't really know how to build like a cohesive narrative so quickly like they have in the past.
Yeah,
we'll see.
But that in itself, while a good start, the first 100 days is kind of a colloquial term used for this is what is setting the table for the administration going forward. it's not the first 1,000 days. Like this won't be something that I believe the history doesn't trend towards expecting this to be a long, slow moving thing. It's a very, anything that moves fast, you break things, and then it dies out of energy. Like he can't, eventually he'll enter enough rooms to where he's already been in there before. Like you can't rearrange the furniture too often before people don't recognize the house any longer. So if there's going to be lasting change that comes from this, at some point he's going to have to bury some anchors and build some foundational pillars upon the change that he's drastically sweeping through now. Otherwise, I agree with Fahrenheit. All this can just be washed away, and Democrats with a maybe a different calling card will be right back in there to work on undoing all of this stuff. Again, not to be black-pilled. That's just how history has kind of gone in this country, especially during our lifetimes.
So in something of a break from Fahrenheit's thesis in part 2 here, where a lot of what he builds, what the Republican Party is and will be, is on like white nationalism. What you saw in this last election was a lot of anything but that. And I think it was Chuck Todd. I can't remember who it was exactly, but I have mentioned this numerous times, but on NBC on election night with their coverage, he said the problem that Democrats have had is they've treated minorities as voting blocks instead of treating them as working class citizens. And that changed, or that didn't really change so much as they figured out Trump was talking to them as the working class, whereas the Democrats have been talking to them as a diversity higher block of votes. And that really moved them to the right. Does that kind of thing carry over? Because so far what we've seen in the last 4 months, the Democrats don't seem to have moved away from treating all of those people as just a block. They don't actually care about them as working class citizens, as communities, as anything other than a specific box to check and say, we care about you because you are this thing. Not because you're actually human beings who live here and need to make a living, but just because you fit into this, check mark of the things that we need to care about. Does that change in the next 2 to 4 years?
I'd say just real quickly this kind of goes back to just human nature in a way that when your perception, rightly or wrongly, is that you are so entrenched in power, you become comfortable to the point of complacent where there are doors that go unlocked and you leave an opening for somebody to come in and do exactly what Trump is doing now, because you are so confident in your ability to wield power that you can't imagine that you will ever lose grip, even if for only 4 years at a time, or really 2 years at a time. So I think that they just got a little comfortable, because win or lose an election, they still have the levers of power, and they just didn't think, well, I think they called us bluff, and we're getting the Trump that we were promised 8 years ago, and I'm loving it. They don't know what to do, because it's like the thing that he said 8 years ago is what he's actually doing now. And so we're in uncharted territory, at least from my experience. I've never seen anything like this. I'm not aware of anything like this, at least in the last 100 years politically. So to answer your question, I don't know, but at least that's how we got here, as how I perceive it. So I think that behind the scenes, publicly, it will be chaos from the Dems. They will look disjointed. They will look chaotic. They have 18 months to get their shit together. They will. They're not completely incompetent. They just got rocked, and they are now in the corner being told by their trainer, if you don't get up, you actually do risk losing power. Right now, I don't think they're so far gone that they're not going to get their shit together. I expect a resurgence in, the midterms.
Well,
Mr.
Magoo, as that is.
Good.
Sorry, Mr. Magoo, I respectfully disagree.
Good.
The Democrats are, how shall we say, they've gone back to the corner and there is no trainer there giving them the pep talk. October 7th, 2023, radically shifted American politics forever. Okay. And on that day, the unholy alliance between Jewish elite power and the minority underclass of this country and of the world was forever broken. Okay. And we saw that play out on a number of elite campuses, all across the country. And at that moment, Democratic donors such as Bill Ackman and others realized that they could no longer play, the global minority, against, the white middle class of America any longer, that they would have to shift their power behind a Donald Trump because it was no longer tenable to have these out and out, anti-Semites on college campuses flying Palestinian flags on the very, campuses that they fund. And because of all of that, the Democrats don't have any real leadership. Like they don't have a direction, a playbook to go. Now we could draw lines, and I would draw lines that it's greater than just Jewish money power that has directed them, but it is come directly from Europe, more or less. And as we see Europe begin to crumble, the Democrats are again, just without a trail to go hunting on, and that is why you see people like Newsom and others move closer to the right. And the final thing that I'll say, and I'll let you guys respond to that. Reading Paul's article here, it's fascinating. This was no more than 6 months ago. Okay. It reads like something that was written 6 years ago, like from a totally different era, from a time period in which we were the dispossessed, that we were the outsiders. And now, just a few weeks into the Trump presidency, we are now the insiders. Okay. Cable news media is dropping in viewership, by the month. Social media, particularly Twitter, is the place where politics gets done, and we dominate that. YouTube and podcasts are all, littered with, right adjacent figures. So we, or the people, at least on our side of the room, are the ones driving the bus right now. And I just don't see a path for the Democrats to get back. So I am much more optimistic in that sense. I have more to say, but I don't want to suck all the air out of the room.
Quickly, I would like to just respond by saying I'm glad you disagreed. There's nothing more boring than if 5 dudes are all like, I agree. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip anyway, just based on my gut. And the more that I heard what you just said, it made me think it's like, okay, so in a way, and I could be incorrect, please correct me if I'm wrong. In a way, Zionism is what is going to help defeat modern American Democrats as a political party as they currently stand.
Yes.
See, now I'm conflicted.
Exactly. Aren't we all?
But at the same time, the way that I see that issue is a lot of people, I think we're 5 for 5 as far as voting for Trump in this, in this conversation. But I wouldn't imagine it would be 5 for 5 pro-Israel. There might be 1, 2, or 3, but not a full consensus. If anything, it would be a lot closer the other way. So I see that, noticing as something akin to 2013, 14, 15 wokeism or wokeness or whatever on college campuses. A lot of people were like, why pay attention to what college kids are yapping about? They're just dumbass punk kids. Eventually they graduate. Eventually they grow up. Eventually they fill areas in the public sphere. And so I think for the anecdote that you gave, that might be temporary. And if the wave of, let's just say, not respecting our greatest ally becomes the prominent, position held, then what?
We have an entirely new political landscape that is being formed right in front of our eyes, whereas it was previously, drawn upon racial lines, at least for the past, I would say, 2 decades thereabouts from Obama forward. And previous to Obama, you could say it was drawn along perhaps like social classes or even, the religious right and so forth. So it could potentially, we could see a new landscape, with Candace Owens on one side and I don't know, like who.
White news for Harris.
And who?
I was going to say Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, right? Like on the other side. But I don't know how this is all going to shape out. It's going to be really, really interesting, I think.
But I think you have like a super divided cohort. Like there's not any dominant, even for what you're saying, like the even if we control like the broader discussion of the narrative on the right side, it does seem like that, like we're driving that discussion, but it seems like there's still the sort of establishment version of republicanism that's kind of has a foothold still, even though we want to, because they still believe in, hey, just take the, for instance, I guess, and it's even moving leftward. I would say, it's sort of that, what's his name? That guy that is registering a lot of people to vote, but like he's gay, and he's basically saying like, I mean, not saying anything about that, but I'm saying like he's promoting like, hey, Trump supports LGB, but not the T, and this kind of stuff.
Pressler.
Scott Pressler.
Scott Pressler, yeah.
Walk away movement.
Yeah, basically, when you're accepting such a broad cohort, like you can't create a serious, cohesive movement with that. It's such a broad, sort of set of ideologies that are trying to, become something cohesive.
So kind of like how the Democrats try to like put like Muslims and gay people on the same team.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, this is where I would ask: do you even need a cohesive front? The goal,
not to win an election, but
yeah.
I would say you do need a cohesive, because that's when the left was the strongest, when they had a progressive coalition, like when the see, this is where I think why they won 2020 is why they lost 2024, because the progressive coalition in 2020 was like this, and then whenever 2024 came around, they were splintering and splitting off, because you have, like Forte said, you have the sort of Muslim, and then the LGBT and all this kind of stuff. You can't keep that together for that long. Well, they were able to keep it together for that election because it was really strong, and because they didn't have any reason to fight each other. But now when it's like, hey, we have sort of we believe in our cause, we believe in the LGBT cause, and then there's the other.
Well, I would say they had that cohesion because they had the power. Once you get the power, you get the cohesion. I don't think the cohesion comes and then power follows. I think power first, do whatever it takes to get the power. Cohesion follows behind because people want to follow leaders.
Look at Pressler got a metric ton of Amish to register. So obviously there was something going on with this election, with this movement that crossed those lines, that crossed those cultural stigma lines. Like the Amish, you would think would be some of the last ones that would get on board with, like, follow the gay guy, to the polling station, but it happened. It actually happened. So
Well, that's what happens when you start arresting guys for trying to feed their neighbors.
So there's something big going on there that kind of cross some of those cultural lines. To what y'all were talking about earlier with like what Patriot Way was talking about with like the lack of leadership from the Democrat side. Like they don't have the Barack that's rallying the troops, and Michelle has effectively disappeared. Like I think there were a lot that thought that she would be the next one to do that, and since about September, since about the time that that Paul Fahrenheidt wrote this article, Michelle has basically disappeared.
Well, now that they are, reducing the amount of trans, people in men's
Visibility.
space, naturally she's going to feel slightly uncomfortable about that. Sorry, if I don't get my National Enquirer jabs in, then what am I even doing here?
What's Bat Boy up to these days?
Well, I got bad news. COVID.
Oh.
When you know it. Yeah.
Chinese ate him.
Ironic.
So anyway,
don't forget that.
What?
Sorry. Don't forget that Barack Obama was largely astroturfed himself.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, hearing from Rush Limbaugh in 2008 that he was a Fabian socialist, and guess what? Turns out to be true. Like the city of London and all of those guys completely, again, put all the money behind his campaign. So we should not be fooled into these personalities that we think that just suddenly, people just rally around.
The Vance, like even with Vance, I feel like
Vance. Yeah,
I feel like people are really like, especially the memes that are coming out. Like I feel like that's definitely a pull, and I, like you some of it may be good. That's one thing you have to recognize. Like, okay, you're being propagandized, and some propaganda may be somewhat good,
helpful,
but also like you have to understand why
it's got to be believable. Yes.
Yeah.
Kamala was not believable. They tried to astroturf her, but like at the end of the day, you couldn't get black men on board to vote for, this vaguely Indian, half Indian, half black woman.
My brothers.
It just didn't work.
You're not going to pull one over on them. Not today. Not about that. You might fool them in other ways.
So that goes
cell phone video is very, very convincing. However, you throw a woman in front of them, you're gonna have to try a different model. That's all I'm saying.
So that
unless she's twerking, maybe if she was twerking,
the Democrats lack a central figure to kind of be the face and the leadership of that party going forward. They're also, to some extent, losing a lot of their media. CNN. While CNN still paints everything with a slightly blue brush, they are actually, after hundreds upon hundreds of firings and major network shakeup with the way that like all of their content and a lot of other things, they are finally starting to report some news in legitimate ways. NBC is going through the same thing right now. MSNBC is having some firings and major shakeups. Whether they'll come out on the other side actually looking like a real news network or continuing to look more like the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party is to be seen, but they're in the midst of some major shakeups. CBS and ABC seem to be eternally lost. Time magazine. Time has, if you read any of like the Donald Trump Man of the Year or Person of the Year, we're going to Man of the Year article.
King of the Year.
King of the Year, yes. There were parts of it that still had that tilt, that leftist lean to it, but by and large, it was very much a just good piece about Donald Trump. There are others that have moved in similar directions. So you're seeing not just that the left lacks the leadership as far as the Democrat figurehead to be their next like person That's
No, I think
kind of-
they've got one. I mean, obviously, it's going to be Newsom. I'm pretty sure. Like,
but
he's
he's currently in the process of this like shift to moderate thing that he's
that's
doing.
why
So
he's going to be. That's why he's going to become the new, like,
But
New
see,
Bill
that-
Clinton.
because he's
but
going
see,
on the
that
podcast.
doesn't play
and-
well. That doesn't play well with their uber progressive base, and those are the loudest and the most annoying cocksuckers on the planet, literally and figuratively speaking. They are the ones who have driven that party for the last 15 years. So to move to a moderate, if you want to call Gavin Newsom moderate, at least the image that Gavin Newsom is creating for himself as a moderate, that is going to piss off their most vocal base. And then what do? So then when you've got all of the loud screaming at the clouds people, loud screaming at you because you're shifting to being moderate, now what happens?
see,
that's a recipe for implosion.
So this is where I think you're relying on more of a populist sort of view, whereas I'm thinking more of an elitist sort of view. So my thinking is that by moving to a moderate position, Newsom is going to ingratiate himself with like the sort of like Mark Zuckerberg's of the world, and then they're going to be his donor. Like that's his donor class. He's going to ingratiate himself with the sort of liberal donor class, and by acting, kind of maybe he acts a little bit more macho, and Mark Zuckerberg's like, yeah, I want a guy like that. Look at Vance. He's not quite as much gusto as Newsom or whatever, and I want to back him. So that'll be where he draws some of that support of that donor base, the typical Democrat donor base, and then they'll push out the message of like, hey, progressive wokies, like all the your pink-haired, blue-haired feminists or whatever, you guys now have to like Newsom because he is the guy who's going to bring about the change, and they're going to be the ones that push the message for him. He doesn't have to do that. Like they can do that for him.
I don't feel like any of that is going to be a recipe towards moving any of the current like Southern Republicans to go back to being Dixiecrats, though.
Yeah.
I think maybe to Stillman Fahrenheit's point, there is a pathway where this happens, where with what Trey just brought up with Newsom and how he's trying to be more moderate, is the current aesthetic of the modern Democrat on a national level is to find the 80-20 issue, the 80% popular, currently Republican issue, and glue themselves like a protester in an art gallery, physically glue themselves to that 20% and be as vocally unpopular as possible, which is great for activism, but terrible for electoral politics. They will shake away that 20% and they will adhere themselves more to the 80%, which is currently under the Trump umbrella. Because think about it this way. I believe, just based on what I've seen, there are leftists or Democrats or the left me type Joe Rogans that want nothing more. They desire a left coming back to them more than they desire a Trump reflecting them. More than anything, they want so badly to be proud to be a Democrat again, and they will put more value on that than they ever will give credit to Trump for giving them the thing that they actually want. It's the institutionalized it's the institutionalism in them, the credentialism in them. They need that Democrat brand to uphold the value that they put on it, and right now it hasn't. So they will shirk off the 20% activists, and they will put their efforts in trying to capture the majority, which are mostly centrists that are under the Trump wing now, that will be happy to leave it if the Democrats just start looking somewhat cogent and less absurd, and all that, which is also a sign of victory for the right to get the left to drag themselves out of the absolute fucking insanity that they've been in for the past decade plus. Now, a lot of right-wingers will say, well, this is a fail because now we're going back. If you drag the left, populist or whatever, out of that area and make the Democrat party say fuck off to the activists, then I see that as one step forward in the right direction, even though it's getting us in the mud, not getting us to really where we want, because, well, we have multiculturalism, melting pot bullshit happening, and we're never going to drag everybody all the way across our finish line.
See, this is something that I also kind of think the Obama wing. So as Alan says, the Obama wing of the Uniparty isn't going to give up control of the party. They will anoint their candidate, and that will be the DNC pig, period, even if it has to be Big Mike himself. The activist side, that 20%, they are always the loudest. And they have gone for the last 10 to 15 years being the greasy wheel that got the grease. And the second that they stop getting the grease, they're going to become louder. They're going to become more obnoxious. They're going to ramp up their activism. And instead of it being aimed at Trump, it's going to be aimed at the left. It's going to be aimed at the DNC itself. And the DNC does not want that smoke. Even if it means losing, they do not want to piss off the people that will make them unpopular as far as like being in support of the thing goes. They
didn't care about Bernie.
Be in support of the thing.
Well, real quick, and I think the Democrat, the modern, upcoming, to be unveiled at a date TBD, Democrat Party that will be headlined by Gavin Newsom will be treated just like the homeless before Xi Jinping visited. They will sweep them away to put on a totally different show for a new audience that they currently have not been pandering to. They will shirk away those shock troops that no longer bring them any value, and they will be relegated to the corners of America where they fucking belong the entire time. Pardon my language, but whatever. It's like 10 p.m. or whatever.
I hope you're right.
Twitch banned Hassan and
brought him right back.
And then brought him right back. But
it's like, I hope you're right, but I don't think as long as you have the Schumers, AOC, Pelosi, Ilhan Omar, like as long as that is the face of the Democratic Party, I don't think that happens. They're going to have to basically shuck off the entire diversity hierarchy of the DNC and become a party that looks a lot like Gavin fucking Newsom. And
correct.
If they can do all of that, then yes, I think you're right. And if they can do all of that, then they become, more of a Bill Clinton, mid 90s Democrat, and is like,
and everyone's going to love that.
Right.
Everyone's going to love that because they want to go back to the 90s.
That?
That's what they got to do. It's brand and image maintenance.
Because honestly, Trump is, a Bill Clinton Democrat of the 90s. So then you really do have the Uniparty. You have a lot of the same thing from both sides, and then it's just who is pushing that thing in the slightly different direction that benefits me more than it doesn't. And
that's why my point is up until recently, the way you sell an idea is ideology, when it's always been about branding. Less about ideology, more about aesthetics. Their aesthetics are shit. They have old
that's why propaganda
80-year-old
worked so long. Like what I remember, what was the campaign about? Is it William Jennings Bryan? Was that him about it was about gold or silver? And
that's it. 1896.
Yeah. So his whole stick, was about the gold and silver issue, but he branded it so well that everyone, basically hopped on board with him, and he was their guy, and he just basically steamrolled everything because of that one issue, and he was able to brand it well enough.
And this is why I said what I said earlier, where I don't think they're idiots. I just think that they have been lulled to sleep because they've been in power and they've been able to allow the 20% to be the dominant vocal faction of their party. And I think that the next 6 months, 6 to 8, 10, 12 months is going to be hilarious for us. We're going to love everything that comes out of the Democrat Party because obviously. But they will get their shit together. They will realize that, okay, this is a brand realignment. We have to, it's like a new CEO coming in saying, shuffling up the hierarchy here. You're now reporting to him. You're reporting to him. We're not funding this anymore. Well, we can't anyway because we don't have the money regardless. It's wildly unpopular to do all the things that we've run on before. It's time for us to do a quick pivot, and they will polish that turd, and the left me folks will hurl themselves back at it. And we will be caught in a whiplash effect where all of us now who are loving where we are, seeing what Trump is doing, will be caught on our heels going, how did that happen? We were supposed to rule for the next 12 years.
Now, I do want to loop Patriot Way back in that one of the things he mentioned was the shift in Europe. And that could affect the left going forward, because the left has had a lot of extremely progressive, uber left-wing support from Europe up to this point. There is not as fast as it shifted in the U.S. in this last election, but there is a pretty quick shift that's happening across Europe in response to a lot of the immigrant stuff and a lot of other big issues that have been going on. Now, the Ukraine thing could push that faster or slower, but there has been a considerable move to the right in Europe. That could slow some of the momentum, or it could, if the left of Europe becomes more moderate as well, then that could play into the left of the U.S. becoming more moderate. But the left of Europe seems to be doubling down on progressive insanity, even more so than the left of the U.S. is currently. So
yeah, they're suicidal. They're suicidal over there.
Yeah. The left of Europe is suicidal in their devotion to progressivism. So that could hamper the ability of the left in the U.S. to make significant strides in that direction.
Well, Europe is the birthplace of post-industrial revolution leftism. So you have ingrained in a large amount of people that have been in a certain plot of land for centuries that, like, no, this is our only way. American leftism is a century old, as far as like modern day popular leftist ideas is fairly recent. And so they haven't really taken root to the degree that they have in Europe. And again, I just need to echo all my points that I'm saying about the resurgence of the Democrat Party comes from an inherent knee-jerk black pill baseline within myself. I'm admitting that. So I think that is just the obvious tactic that the Democrats not only will take, but they must take. And that's already likely in motion. To me, that's not even like the conversation. The conversation is how do you combat that currently under the Trump-Vance administration? Because, like I said, the next 6 to 10, 12 months are going to be just hilariously fun for us. But if they're not already working on the counter to what the Democrats are naturally going to do by trying to come back to the center, if you're not like nonstop dunking on them and smoking their ass for saying, look who's coming back. Look who's sharing our idea. Like you have to trademark those ideas as they're going through their brand re-imaging and say, no. They're just coming back and using what we already are doing. Like to me, the conversation
need to have you need to clip farm them essentially.
To me,
that's what you need to do.
To me, the conversation is like, you need to go ahead and get in front of the change that the Democrats are going to make and not even worry about, are they going to bring in their 20% activists? But fuck them. You're going to lose the middle. You're going to lose the left me people. Like in sales, it's like, yeah, selling somebody once is just getting your foot in the door, but you have to constantly sell them so they don't find another service provider or whatever, never not be selling, always be selling. Like, otherwise you're going to lose them. So what is the current right going to do to combat what the left is obviously they have to do if they are to survive.
Let me jump back in here real quick and just, Mr. Magoo, just take a deep breath, man.
Okay.
And let me just assure you, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all good.
Let me preface where his black pilling comes from, because he's an Atlanta Falcons fan. So
listen, the fact that the Democrat, they don't have any original ideas any longer. All that they have now is to, and stop me if this sounds familiar, to say, oh, look at the Republicans not doing what it is that they're saying that they're doing. Okay. And taking, a Trump idea and then relabeling it as their own, no tax on tips, etc. They are at a loss. I think that I am going to be so bold as to say that the left as we currently know it, and I often think about what Curtis Yarvin once said about Nazi Germany, after Hitler had killed himself and Berlin was taken over, and it was almost as if all of those people that were in the Nazi bureaucracy, the next day they were dressed up as communists or they were dressed up as social democrats. Just overnight they just switched uniforms. And I think a lot of these people that we see, and trust me, I see them, on my social media timeline. In 5 years, they will be the biggest MAGA people and they're kind of already are. They're making arguments about the Constitution and violations of civil rights. I'm telling you, like, all of the things that we had been saying, for the past 4 years, now they are saying. And I want to go back to this paragraph here, though, which I think we're dancing around the issue. And we started off, okay, Justin, you were talking about, this idea of identity politics versus social classes, which is really interesting because it was Karl Marx who redefined all of Europe based upon social classes and not race. Okay, you see, and modern conservatism has formed itself really in reaction to Marx. In many ways, the modern conservative is more Marxist than his forefathers. But there's this paragraph here, just a few paragraphs down in Fahrenheit's second article here. It says, the real answer for the question, for better or worse, and more often for worse, the Republican Party is the party of the white American. The problem is that the white people are not allowed to be racist or talk about race in any context, which renders the Republican Party redundant. They've been forced to talk about the economy or endless foreign wars or trade disparities or energy policy or how wokeness goes against meritocracy, but they cannot for 1 second talk about the actual problem their constituents face because it's taboo. They aren't allowed to in the feminized United States. J.D. Vance, who makes an occasional dog whistles to this, is crucified daily in the media for doing so, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about culture. And, the more that I listen to Thomas and I listen to, Paul and other guys, like that, the more that I realize and Pete, these issues of like, how much are our taxes? And by the way, yes, we're going to get rid of the IRS and there won't be any more federal income tax. But all of these things are like non-issues. At the center of what makes us Americans is our culture. And until we're able to identify exactly and as Americans, the more that we have to, give in and say, well, this person here speaks another language and they've got a different religion, but that's okay because I'm supposed to be tolerant. That erodes away at our identity. And Justin, I don't know if you're still there, but this conversation got resurrected because I shared with you that interview from
Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah. That's right. And he was talking about how Black people feel more comfortable around other Black people. And it's like, that's an interesting thing to say. It's really interesting. So I don't know how all of this is going to play out politically. To me, that's less interesting as to culturally, how are we going to find our roots in America?
Let's listen to that Trevor Noah clip right quick, because there is a lot that this entire thing was built on that, and we haven't really hit on it yet, but that does play into a lot of the conversation going forward. And how does all of Paul Fahrenheit's article tie into that going forward?
I found myself wondering, and this applies to America, and then maybe it'll go to other places in a different way, because Finland ties in. Do you think that integration was the right move? And now I'm separating two things, because I know in America people are like, well, of course, I mean, there was racism and there's segregation, and I go, yeah, no, I'm separating them. Let's separate someone being oppressed and someone not being able to get a job and someone not being able to get a bank loan. Let's take all of those, the negative things away, because I'll put myself out personally and say, I think whether we're talking about gifted kids who are anomalous, let's say, to the norm, whether we are talking about and I mean anything that does not fit into a category, I think the part of the reason Finland is able to do it is because, have you been to Finland?
It's very homogeneous.
I've been to Finland. You know who's in Finland? Finnish people. That's it. And because they're all Finnish, there's an idea of like, no, we all head in the same direction. We all know what our actions mean. And that's a really powerful thing I've learned in communicating with other people. When I'm in a room with anyone where we start to tie together multiple things. So if I'm in a room with Black people, already there's like an implicit trust because we know what certain actions, words, and vibes mean. And then you're in a room with another African. Already. Now, even if you shout at me, I know what your shout means. The same way an Italian knows what an Italian shout means.
Yeah.
Right? I know I'm prefacing it with a lot because it's a loaded question.
Yes.
But I would love to know if you think integration was the right solution, maybe, on the other side of, what America, of civil rights.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I don't think it's actually that controversial when, if you understand that segregation and integration weren't the only options. Like, those are, within those two options, it may seem like integration is the more progressive. Like, of course, we don't want segregation. But again, when you're being integrated into institutions, into a culture that's a supremacist culture, that's a culture that feeds off of hierarchy, that feeds off of insecurity, anxiety, why are we being integrated into that?
Oh, man, hierarchy, yeah.
Okay, well, I like the first 90% of that.
I kind of find it funny that he brings up Finland as an example, because wasn't like the Finnish and Spain during the Spanish Civil War like the only two times the actual right wing won in the 20th century?
There you go.
Yeah.
And this comes back to something that Mark was on in the comments earlier, and I'm sure he's still watching. Mark and I went on with Carlos Abelar when he was still doing Los Libertinos, and we talked about integration, and there was a big disconnect between Mark and I and Carlos, because Carlos thought that integration was a good thing because it put everybody on the same playing field. But what we were trying to explain was what happened with integration was not a natural evolution of things. It was, now we're taking all of these people and just cramming them together, whether they want to be together or not. And it created hostility. It created tension. It created a situation that was less than ideal for everybody involved.
That's how you got teachers lit on fire in New York City high schools.
And now there is some extent to which there are people like Trevor Noah and others on the left who are looking at integration and saying stuff like this, like there were other options. Was this really the best option when you had an opportunity to just take a step back now, 50, 60 years after the fact? Was that really the best way to do this? I mean, there are plenty of examples and things that you can look at historically where Black communities were doing well before integration, and then integration happened, and now they are back in a worse position than they were pre-integration. So you have people looking at this kind of stuff objectively, possibly for the first time in 60 plus years.
How long until Trevor Noah is like quoting like Thomas Sowell?
That's what I was about to
Not
say.
long. Not long.
The first time I got exposed to this, I'm ashamed to say, was reading a Sowell book where he was describing, I think it was a Baltimore high school that was entirely Black, Black students, Black teachers, Black principals. And he was talking about how the teachers knew the students' parents, and probably in some cases even taught the parents of these students. And the students were high achieving, and they in some cases were achieving maybe even higher than their white counterparts across town. And then when integration came along, it destroyed all of that natural hierarchy, natural community that was there. And the same thing, this gets repeated, all across the South. You had entire, Black neighborhoods with economies that were all there. And so I'm a little bit more optimistic when it comes to integration, but I would say that any top-down, force of integration is gonna lead to some bad outcomes, as we have seen.
So, as it's probably pretty evident by the accoutrement behind me, I live in the greater Atlanta area, and where I grew up near a place that is, I don't know if it's on Google Maps, but everybody knows it as the Promised Land. It's in a part of East Atlanta, out in the suburbs, that was promised to freed slaves. And so I lived maybe 5-10 minutes from there growing up. And I went to school with the kids that grew up there. And one of my friends from childhood that is far left, like he and I do not talk politics. We just know that we are 180 from each other. He shared this thing. Y'all probably seen it go around. This thing where it's this long ass word thing that says, if you oppose DEI, you should have to use the full phrase instead of the letters. Be brave and say, I oppose diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bonus points if you admit which part you don't like. Blah, 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 blah. Basically saying, what part of DEI do you not like? Now, he shared that because he has a robust group of friends / followers on Facebook. And I never comment under his post because I genuinely like him as a person, even though politically and in a lot of other ways, we'll just never see eye to eye. But I was taken aback by one of the comments in reaction to this. It's from another Black gentleman. He said the concept is that we thought because of basically his whole thing was saying I oppose DEI, this other Black guy, because my buddy posted it thinking that it was going to be a bunch of racist white people being like, I hate CRT, man. That shit's fucking stupid. And confusing the aspect of the point that he's sharing. Now, me, I hate all of this because, like what Patriot Way was saying, is it's a top-down thing. It's being forced upon us. It's not organic. It's not how we would naturally organize ourselves. So there's going to be consternation even from Black leftists that are woke on how much better they had pre-civil rights. And he basically says the moment it was no longer politically convenient then corporations immediately changed up at their expense. These were supposed to be corporate values, but in the words of the great Nelson Mandela, quote, he who changes his principles based on whom he is dealing with is not fit. DEI did not help black people. DEI helped the corporations pandering support from black people. We broke ceilings before, blah, will be better after. $1.8 trillion, revenue from blacks is what they were really after. I look at that and I go, I will never agree with you politically, and I don't want to particularly share a community with you because you have your own goals that are different than mine. But is there an avenue where we should partner, support, or I don't know, go, yeah, dude, I'll put a like on that, or I'll even, what avenue is there to look at those people and say and try to cultivate that more, or is there a reason to? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there because I saw like black leftist friends of mine see this as fuck DEI. Trust Malcolm when he tells you who to be the most weary of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Ironically, I have a couple of friends that are black nationalists. And they politically, they're a little bit more like libertarian, and they're in the conspiracy world. One particular friend, specifically. And so, yeah, like that instinct and that impulse is, like, I kind of agree with you, Magoo, but I guess the second half to my rant and all of this is, and this might diverge a little bit from what Paul has in mind, his vision for America, but to me, we all have to just become Americans, and white or black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever it is, we'll need to close the borders at some point. We don't need to be importing, millions from the third world. But at some point, I think that ideally we kind of all, it's a big enough country to where we can all kind of have our corners and our spaces. And there's going to be a group of people that runs the banks, and there's going to be a group of people that tills the fields, and there's going to be another group of people that, are businessmen and et cetera. There's enough room for all of us to get together, but it doesn't mean that we have to be all smashed up together, in some sort of, melting pot stew. Yeah. Yeah. But ultimately our identity has to be that of Americans. And Paul, Paul Fahrenheidt gets a lot of his ideas from Yaki. And Yaki said that the high culture of Europe could not be exported to America. Okay. And so a lot of these high ideas that Paul's talking about here, he's kind of riffing off of this, but he disagrees. He has the presumption that America can still carry the high culture of Europe over here. And there's a part of that kind of makes me uncomfortable, because that's as you can tell, as we're kind of in conflict with Europe, over some global geopolitical stuff. Like my family came here to get away from, like the aristocracy and the monarchs of Europe. They had all decayed, and America was a place where, my family could get a fresh start. And so I don't know if a new high culture can be created here, or if it's going to be carried on. To me, like, I don't know if that even really matters to my day-to-day life. More than anything else, I think that I'll raise my children as Americans. Like, that's, our number one priority is to this land and to the people of this country and our neighbors.
Well, isn't that already? I mean, I don't know if you're like when you're saying high culture, how you're specifically referring to it, but wouldn't just in general like the general Americana, like the aesthetic of Americana that basically frightens all of Europe, that they any shred of American nationalism just makes them reel in disgust. like the Trump hugging an American flag, and all this sort of Americana, God, guns, and all this kind of stuff.
Well, high culture. Sorry, Trey. Just to clarify, high culture comes from Spangler, and this is like cutting edge, technology, arts, aesthetics, all of that stuff. So it would be a little bit more than our Bud Lights and our rifles, in our backyards and grilling and so forth. This is what he is pointing to is maybe a little bit more elitist.
Yeah, I've also heard it argued that America's high culture is Southern, but specifically came out of the Virginia Cavalier culture.
Yes, right.
Sorry, I can't help it. Old Dominion.
Forte, how are you able to make an entirely cogent point by only saying 7 words in 10 seconds, where I ramble on for 3 minutes and don't get anywhere? Teach me your ways.
I don't know. Just I like the feedback off of you. You say the words that I don't have to say. Yeah, I can't remember where I heard that from before. It could have even been from I don't know. Anyway,
it was from Paul, more than likely.
Was it Paul?
Yeah, he's always in Twitter Spaces talking about how.
Well, I think I got some of it from Pastor John Harris also. I don't know if you know who that is.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
So to kind of wind down, how do we feel about Paul's assumptions on his predictions for the Republican Party going forward? Because he kind of thinks it's dead and done. And based off of November, I don't see that as being very likely or probable, at least not in probably the next 4 to 6 years anyway.
As someone who can share, just real quick, as someone who can share an understanding of the inherent black pill mentality that is constantly something you have to fight against, it's almost the safe point to make a proclamation for the worst case scenario, so that when that doesn't happen, or something negative that you would not want to happen, so that if it happens, you're right, but if it doesn't happen, you're happy. Not to oversimplify Paul's stance, but I understand that mindset of making a point like that, is that you got nothing to lose if you choose that side of the argument.
That's fair.
Sorry, I feel like I took all the air out of the stream. I apologize if I did that, but just to tie it all up, I think that the Republican Party post 24 election, it's now the big tent. We're going to have to accept the fact that there are going to be people alongside of us that maybe we don't see. Yeah, there's going to be gays inside the Republican Party, and there's probably going to be tiny hats in there as well too. The Democrats are going to be
7-Eleven owners
to the outer party, if not completely decimated.
Thank you. Vote again.
So what does that mean for us? And I think that, interestingly enough, there could be a situation where some of us get jettisoned out of the Republican Party and become outer party because of particular biases. Maybe it's anti-Zionist.
Noticing things.
Yeah. But I'm not confident on that, because I look at the influence of Tucker Carlson and his alignment with people that are, close to the inner circle currently. So I think it's to be determined.
Yeah. One thing I'll say, and I think this piggybacks, or at least is parallel to what Patriot Way just said, is whilst arguments like what Paul is making are interesting for conversation and podcast fodder, which I welcome, and I'm thankful, Justin, you invited me in to add whatever I've added, if I've added anything into this conversation, is nobody could have predicted where we are today 12 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. So forecasting what is to come, I think, is almost a fool's errand. I think it's something that the likelihood that you know what is going to happen based on just the recent past, you have a confidence in something that I just have yet to be introduced to. I don't know how to call what's coming outside of what I said about the Democrat Party. That just seems logical as a reaction to the thing. But where we're going from here and what's going to happen, I don't have a clue. Which means that I think that most people that share our idea of what we would like to see remains never unchanged. Like, it has to be constant. Cool, we won an election. Don't be like the Dems and get soft and get comfortable, because you will, like the Dems, watch that shit just get immediately steamrolled out of the blue. And like the famous quote, like, who voted for fill in the blank? None of my friends voted for him. If your world stays that small, you will be very surprised when the world is not reflecting your little corner of the internet. So we gotta keep doing the same thing that we've done up to this point. And one thing I will say is, this actually came from my company annual meeting. There was something that was said that I think was very apropos to right now. And they said, hey, when we were going from a $25 million company to a $50 million company, we did XYZ. But to get from a $50 million company to a $100 million company, what got us to the $50 million mark no longer was good enough. And now that we're at a fill in the blank dollar amount to get to the next thing, whatever we've done to get to this point isn't going to work. We're going to have to do things differently to get to that next milestone. And that is the mindset that I think is required by everybody who is in our sphere if you want to see this continue. What got us to yesterday isn't going to get us to tomorrow.
I think that's a lot of what Patriot Way was saying earlier, is that if we want to keep winning, unfortunately, we're going to have to basically take a back seat and let the Dave Rubins and the Scott Presslers effectively help drive the Republican Party, even if we don't agree with them. They're going to have to be consistent players that are not who we would be, cogent with, to be okay with. And if we can sort of be malleable, I guess, in that way, then that would be adaptable enough to kind of push that further than I think that is the way you have to win now. You're going to have to be adaptable to get a large coalition, and it's not going to, like we said earlier, it's not necessarily going to be cohesive and it's going to splinter, but you have to kind of keep it together to be able to piece wins out of it. Because a lot of the people are basically, some of these people are voting even though they didn't know it. They're disadvantaging themselves because some of these DEI programs are going away and stuff like that. So that is something that we kind of have to come to terms with, I guess.
So we're gonna cross the bridge later on the whole Dave Rubin buying babies.
Yeah.
We'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
Apparently Elon is turkey bastering in his own kids and a bevy of women. So, what moral high ground do we have to start? Who are we casting out first?
A lot of glass.
My vote's Rubin, but at the same time, the left me crowd. I guess it's better to have them in our voting block than to go against them. You know, politically speaking, as far as like what is the smart tactic and not, you know, what is the most what's the word? What's the most practical move in the now to get to where we want to be versus like, you know, principles the whole time. You will principle yourself right into an early political grave.
Yeah, be Machiavellian.
Yeah, there are some serious fault lines within this current coalition because, you know, let's not forget that these technocrats aren't exactly our friends. You know, they just happen to be coming our way at this moment. But again, I guess I'm forecasting like decades ahead of time. Like once again, like things could be so rearranged to where they're not in our sphere. They're not doing our will. And these terms of like left and right are kind of messy. You know, they're not always very descriptive. But yeah, like there's going to be fault lines, and but in general, I like what you're saying, Magoo, which is we need to, yes, while being Machiavellian and keeping power is important, we need to make sure that it is benefiting our people. And I think that's it for me. That's all that I have to say.
Right on.
Feel like we covered a lot, and I think we covered it fairly well. Hopefully anybody listening or watching got something out of it. Hopefully you took some of Jim's black pills and some of Patriot Way's white pills and find a happy medium where maybe you don't feel quite so pessimistic, but also you
Just
understand.
take them both at the same time.
Yeah, where you understand that there are some areas where the right side of things needs to remain diligent and understand how they won and how you're going to continue to win as the landscape kind of shifts going forward.
Yeah, and for the record, black pills are a suppository. They belong in your ass. There. I got my jab in.
Salute to you, Magoo.
Hell yeah. And to be honest, I'm actually very optimistic. Like, I'm not bothered or worried about most any of this. Like, I'll partner up with the most extreme leftist black nationalists to further support their, yeah, you were better off pre-civil rights. We should probably focus more on going, you know, that direction. That's a win for me. That's a win for you. Breaks us from this whole racial paradigm that we've been forced to, endure. I'm just looking for the wins where they exist and then manifesting them where they don't. That's all.
Well, tell everybody where you can be found, everybody who's on, and then we will call it a wrap.
Trey?
Baby boy.
Yep. Y'all follow
We're gonna
me
talk
on. Yeah, y'all follow me on Twitter, Trey50Daniel.
At DJ Forte on Twitter.
I'm at aspiring midwit, if that isn't clear enough for you based on the last hour and 23 minutes of me talking.
And you can't find me.
Unfortunately,
Based.
when Patriot Way Media was active, you put out some pretty good stuff. Might need
Yeah, and it nearly broke my brain. It nearly melted my brain. So my life has gotten so much better since I quit tweeting.
as is true for many.
That's why I don't tweet. I just bookmark and save for later.
It's great.
Like every now and then.
Well, thanks, guys. This has been, I thought it was really good. I thought, like I said before, we covered a lot, and I think we covered it pretty well. Hopefully for anybody watching or listening, you got something decent out of it. And I will be back with more of this kind of stuff later on. I think we've got some, speaking of Mark earlier, Mark and I have some history they didn't teach in school that we need to get caught up on and pick back up on. And Don the Pleb and I will be doing some more Ways of the World kind of stuff. I need to get with Dag and do some more becoming your own grocery store type stuff.
Also, real quick, congrats to Mark Metz for having his stuff published and at what is it, Mises.org?
Yeah, Mark was recently published at Mises.org, so head over there and check that out. Really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That'll do it for all of us. Be sure to tune in later on this week once things have kind of settled down. I've been running myself ragged with my kids and haven't had an opportunity to do as much of the daily content as I normally do. As things kind of start to settle down here over the next week or so, and I have more time, I will be back to my daily content. And in the meantime, check out all these guys on Twitter, and you can follow me as well. And that'll do it. Thanks, guys. This has been great.
Thanks, Justin.